or being manipulated, being pushed into something. And so whenever they meet a salesperson, even though they've never met you before, their instant fears are triggered. Well, there's somebody's going to take advantage of me and hustle me and take advantage of me in whatever order. And I say it's almost like a teeter-totter, is that when you meet a customer for the first time, their fear is high, your credibility is low or no. But as you spend time with them, the balance changes, and as your credibility goes up, their fear goes down. When their fear goes down to a certain point, they buy, and there's no problem with buying. And how do you build credibility with customers? Many different ways. We'll talk about them in a second, but one of the very best ways is to be prepared. If you do some homework on your customers and find out a little bit about them before you see them, then you come in prepared, you're more credible, you're more believable. A person can relax, you're a professional. Every single person who's ever had anything written about them any time in their lifetime is on Google or Yahoo. And you can pull it up. If you're calling on a customer, it's absolutely essential that you Google them and download their website and take a look at it. So you walk in and you say, Mr. Prospect, I thank you very much for your time. I had no idea that you have 12 branches and 223 people, and you've been in business for 17 years, and you've had an average growth rate of 12.5% over the last 5 years. That's quite amazing. How do you know that? Well, check your website. All companies have websites and people within the companies. I'm calling on a company or I'm speaking for a company, I'll pull down the background information, all their key people. It's all on the website. When I meet these people, I say, geez, it's nice to meet you. You know, you went to the University of Wisconsin and you were there for 4 years before you transferred to Chicago. And how do you know that stuff? It's on your website. I read it. But your credibility goes straight through the ceiling, and their fear of dealing with you disappears. It's almost like a vanishing act, because you've done your homework. So preparation is the mark of the professional. Now this is really important. Peter Drucker, who just died last week, he said leaders are learners. They're constantly learning. And there's 3 ways that you can upgrade your skills. These 3 ways will make you rich. Number 1 is to read on a regular basis. If you read 1 book per week in your sales, if you read 30 to 60 minutes in selling each week, 30 to 60 minutes will translate into 1 book a week. 1 book a week will translate into 50 books a year. To get a PhD from the University of Chicago or the University of Michigan, to get a PhD you have to read 30 to 50 books and synthesize them into a dissertation, and it takes 8 or 9 years. You can get a PhD in selling every year by, instead of reading the newspaper from cover to cover, just spend half an hour reading in a sales book every day. Read a little bit in the morning before you start off and think about how you can use it. Read a little bit at lunchtime, read a little bit in the evening rather than watching television. You read 30 to 60 minutes a day, it's a book a week. A book a week will give you the equivalent of a PhD in selling every year. I've never given this advice to anybody who has had the discipline to follow it, who has not tripled at least their income in the following 12 months. Their income has gone like this and gone hockey sticked when they just start reading, because you start reading, you see all kinds of different ideas and ways that you can serve your customers better. The stuff that you will learn from reading is phenomenal, if you have the discipline to do it. The second thing is listen to audio programs in your car, preferably Brian Tracy audio programs. The average sales professional in America drives 500 to 1,000 hours. 500 to 1,000 hours behind the wheel of your car. So I say don't listen to them sitting there. Listen to them when you drive, because your physical mind is taken up by the driving, so your mental mind is free to learn. And you can stop, start, move them forward and backward and so on. So that is the equivalent of 3 to 6 months of 40-hour weeks. That's the equivalent of 1 to 2 full-time university semesters. The University of Southern California said that you can get the equivalent of full-time university attendance just listening to audio programs as you drive from appointment to appointment. If you use and turn driving time into learning time, turn your car into what is called a mobile classroom, a classroom on wheels, and just continually learn. A good audio program contains the distilled essence of 30 to 50 books, and it usually is suffused with hundreds of hours of, maybe thousands of hours of personal experience. All right, number 7, and this is the most important of all, is they see themselves as the presidents of their own personal service corporations. They see themselves as the presidents of their own personal services corporations. Now, here is a great question. How many people here are self-employed? Well, what's the true answer? You can't see behind you. What percentage of these people are self-employed? All of us. Yes, 100%. Everybody is self-employed. Everybody is the president of their own personal services corporation from the time you take your first job until the time you retire. You're all the presidents of your own lives. The point that I'm making is that when you begin to see yourself as the president of your own company, you become a different person. You carry yourself differently. You dress differently. You see yourself as a more important person. You like yourself and respect yourself more, and it emanates from you like a light that affects your relationships with your customers. You're more gracious, you're more effective, you have more personal power. Are you with me so far? Yes. And the critical thing is to say these words, I am responsible. This means no more excuses, no more blaming, no criticizing, no complaining. You're responsible. You are not a victim. Lack of responsibility is the major reason for failure in adult life. It's failure not only at a personal level, social level, economic level. The acceptance of responsibility is the mark of the superior person. Now this brings us to the next part of selling. I'm going to talk about 3 critical parts of selling today. The most important part, and probably the 2 areas where we need the most help. The first has to do with this one-to-one relationship. Remember we said before there's a direct relationship between how well you get along with other people, how much they feel that you care about them, and how likely it is that you will be successful. So this brings us to some of the most exhaustive research, starting with Harvard research on selling. And the basic rule is selling for the 21st century will be relationship selling. All sales are relationship sales. Whether you're selling ships or airplanes or ice cream cones, it's all relationships. So we go to page number 2, and we call this relationship selling, and here's the rule. Today, because of complex selling, relations often continue after the sale. Relationships often continue after the sale. So when you've made the sale isn't over. And this is important. It used to be if you buy a newspaper, you never have to see the person again. If you buy an article of clothing, you don't have to see them again. But if you buy more complex products, like more complex services or products or homes or technology, then you are beginning a relationship. We say we do not close sales, we open relationships, because that's when the relationship begins. As far as the customer is concerned, the sale only begins when they say yes. For many salespeople, the sale is now over when they've made the sale. As far as the customer is concerned, the selling relationship has just begun. So this brings us to number 2. The decision to enter into a sale is the decision to enter into a long-term relationship. Now there's another metaphor for a long-term relationship, and it's called a business marriage. Up to now, you've been calling on me, I've been calling on you, we've been dating. Now you're proposing marriage. Now you're proposing that I buy from you, which is the same as a marriage. It's a long-term relationship. Now one of the most important factors that happens between dating and marriage, between visiting with the salesperson and buying, is this factor raises its ugly head. It's called dependency. Now human beings don't like to be dependent on others. Why? It's because we have allowed ourselves to become dependent upon others in the past, and we have been hurt. And so therefore we are very careful about becoming dependent on others. There's a concept in selling called seeding. Seeding is where you just sort of drop what we call by the ways in the course of your sales conversation. When you say, oh, by the way, people pick it up and file it away, but it's not part of your presentation. Here's one of the best by the ways. You say, oh, by the way, people say we give the very best after-sales service they've ever experienced. By the way, our customers say that they have fewer problems with this than any machine that they've ever used. By the way, people that I've dealt with say this wonderful thing about our product. We take good care of them afterwards. We're fast and responsive if they have any problems or complaints, by the way. So number 3 is the customer wants a relationship first. The customer wants a relationship first. The customer wants a relationship first. The customer wants to feel confident in you. You see, the customer doesn't know whether you use titanium welds on your motherboards. They don't know what sort of computers you use to process accounts receivable and payable. They don't know about your service people. They don't know anything about what's going on in your company, so they have to fixate on something, and usually it's you. In selling, we talk about your area of differentiation, your unique selling proposition, your area of competitive advantage. And the fact of the matter is, the one thing where you can win in any sale is yourself. It's because nobody else can be you. You are unique and special in all the world. The quality of the relationship that you can build with the prospect cannot be replaced by anybody or anything else. And top salespeople realize the most important decision will be, do they like me? And they call this liking. We talk about caring, is how much does the person like me? And they like you as a result of some of the things we'll talk about. The more I like you, the more I want to do business with you. The more I like you, the more I trust you, the more confident I am that you will take care of me. The more I like you, the more relaxed I am about going ahead. And the more I like you, the less likely it is I will buy from someone else. even if their product or service is cheaper than yours. I will pay more to buy something from someone I like than from someone that I'm questionable about. So number 4 is, as far as the customer is concerned, the relationship comes first. So here's what we have found. It's called the law of indirect effort. The law of indirect effort says this is you and this is the sale. And many people think if they just go straight for the sale, like for the jugular, they'll be successful, but often that just shows that you don't care about them, you only care about making a sale. So what you do is you do one bank in the side pocket, you focus on the relationship, and if you focus on the relationship, the sale will take care of itself. So using this law of indirect effort, this is the key to success in human relationships. The law of indirect effort is to take the time to get to know them, understand them, show that you care about them, listen to them carefully, look for ways to help them, focus on the customer before anything else, and the sale will take care of itself. So we call this the new model of selling. Okay. If I get off the chart here, you tell me. The new model of selling contrasts the old model of selling with the new model of selling. It's important to understand, there's the old model. Now the old model was broken into 4 parts. The first part of the old model of selling, and this is the way selling was taught for several thousand years, right up until the 70s and the 80s. By the way, you know that selling is the oldest profession. Some people think that something else is the oldest profession, but that's merely a subcategory of selling. So the first 10% of the old model of selling, first 10% was developing rapport. Hello, how are you? How are the wife and kids? Get right down to the purpose of your business. Don't waste time with the customer. People are busy. That's old model selling, old school. The second part of the old model of selling, 20%, was qualifying. Find out how much money they have before you waste any time with them. Today, however, almost everybody today has access to lines of credit, so that's not even that important. Number 3, 30% of the old model of selling was presenting. And this is where you used every trick that you possibly think of to talk them out of the money that you had determined that they had in part 2. Well, the last part of the old model, 40%, was closing. And we were told buyers are liars, so close them early and often. I read a sales magazine recently, and it said the most successful formula in selling is the ABC formula, always be closing. That stuff went out decades ago. People who are writing this stuff also walk along and drag their knuckles along the ground. I mean, this is prehistoric selling. It simply doesn't work in the United States of today, and for definite reasons. Now, in the 70s and 80s, the model flipped. It flipped, and it was like an upside down, what we call the new model of selling. And it also had 4 levels. Now, the reason this happened is America experienced a perfect storm. The perfect storm was 3 things. First of all, America, after World War II, enjoyed the greatest level of affluence and rising of any country in the history of man on earth, until Reagan came in the 80s and cut the taxes, and then the economy exploded again and created another 57 million jobs. The new model has 4 parts. The first part of the new model, 40%, is building trust. Now, the fact is that trust is the critical factor in relationships. It's the critical element of all relationships, between friends and friends, between husbands and wives, between parents and children, especially between sales professionals and their clients. Trust is the element, it's the glue that holds our society together. Now, the next 30% of the new model of selling is identifying needs accurately. And the more you ask a customer or prospect about his or her needs and listen closely to the answers, the more the prospect trusts you. And the more the prospect trusts you, as you listen, the more they will tell you. And the more you ask questions and listen, the more they will tell you. And eventually the prospect will open up and tell you everything you need to know to either make a sale or to realize this is not a good prospect for what you're selling. Because they trust you so much, they will play what we call open kimono with you. They will tell you everything because they want you to have enough information to give them good advice. And they know, they trust you, they know that you won't take advantage of them. Just like a doctor. You become like a doctor of selling. Your job is to do a thorough examination before you make any attempt at a diagnosis. And the doctor, when the doctor is interviewing a patient, the patient tells the doctor everything they possibly can because they want the doctor to be able to make a good diagnosis. So these are the 2 parts. So how far into the sales conversation do you need to be before you even mention your product? 70%. And this is one of the great differences. They have videotaped over 55,000 sales calls and watched these calls, interviewed the salespeople and the customer before and after the call to find out what they were thinking. If it turned into a sale, they asked them why they bought. If it didn't turn into a sale, they asked the customer why they didn't buy. If it took several meetings before it turned into a sale, they asked what happened between the first meeting and the subsequent meetings. And they developed a very clear profile of the successful selling process. What they found is successful salespeople don't start talking about their product until they and the customer are absolutely clear that a need exists. And they only do that by questioning. But unsuccessful salespeople, let's say average salespeople, the bottom 80%, they start talking about their product from the get-go. Hi, how are you? Let me tell you what I've got. Even before they even know if this person is a prospect. So therefore, the slower you go at the beginning and the more careful you are about clearly identifying the prospect's need, the better you are when you begin to present. Which brings us to the next 20%. And the next 20% is presenting. But in presenting, it's very simple. What you do is you simply match the customer's needs to your product or service. Very much like gears. You know, if you shift gears and the gears mesh, they're soundless. But if the gears clash, it makes a lot of noise. When you match your selling process to the customer's buying process, the meshing is perfect, like hands in a glove. So you find that you don't try to sell your product, you just show your customer that based on what he or she has said, your product or service is the ideal thing, all things considered. And here's a rule in selling. People don't argue with their own data. People don't argue with their own information. If you say it's good, that's you saying it. But if I say this is what I wanted, and you point out that your product will do that for me, how can I argue? So the best salespeople feed it back and say, based on what you said, you were concerned about this, well, our product will do that. And you wanted this, well, this product has what you wanted. And you had this problem before, well, this product is designed to avoid that problem. People don't argue with their own data. So the very best sales presentation is where you match carefully what the customer has said to what you offer. And the customer can't argue. The sale then goes together smoothly. Well, the last part, the last 10% of the new model is confirming or closing the sale. Does this make sense to you? Do you like this? Is this what you had in mind? Is this what you were looking for? Is this better than what you're doing now? The closing is very gentle and very professional if you've done the first parts properly. You don't have to use arm wrestling techniques to get the person to make a decision, because the decision is obvious because you've matched the needs so well. The sale is actually made in the presentation. The presentation is the critical part where you simply show the customer that based on what they want and need, based on their problems or situation, what you're offering is the best thing, all things considered, at this time. It may not be the best thing in the whole world, but all things considered, at this time, it's the best choice. Rule number 6 is that listening builds trust. Listening builds trust. Now, if you only remember one thing from today, remember this rule, because this rule will make you popular, it'll make you happy, it'll make you successful, and it'll ultimately make you rich. Leaders, in one of the best management studies done out of Harvard recently, they say leaders are excellent listeners. Leaders are not people who talk and give orders and tell this. Leaders go around and ask a lot of questions. And as a result, they get a lot of very good information and a good understanding of the decisions that need to be made. Leaders are great listeners. Top salespeople are superb listeners. So listening builds trust. So one-to-one relationship between asking questions and getting a chance to listen and building trust, and trust is what leads to the sale. So we say here that, listening skills are the keys to sales success. Listening skills are the keys to sales success. And there's 4 basic listening skills. If you have read all the articles and taken all the courses and listened to all the audios and watched all the videos, there's 4 keys to listening. If you read all the articles in Cosmopolitan and Vogue and People and all that, and all the questionnaires and everything else, and all the articles telling what he wants, what she wants, and so on, it comes down to 4 basic listening skills. First listening skill is listen attentively. Listen attentively. Listen without interruptions. Listen very closely. What we have found, there's an interesting book, sold 1 million copies, called His Needs, Her Needs. And it's about the needs between men and women. And what are the primary needs that men and women have? Well, the primary need that a woman has is to be paid attention to. She wants affection, but affection is expressed in paying attention. The flip side is that there's nothing that makes a woman angrier or more frustrated than to be ignored. And so in dealing with members of the opposite persuasion, the very best thing you can do is express affection and listen attentively. In dealing with customers, listen attentively. Listen without interruptions. Lean forward and hang on every word with no attempt to interrupt. Imagine that your eyes are sun lamps and you want to give your customer's face a tan. And just listen attentively. Just listen attentively. Lean forward. Listen. Nod. Smile. Be what is called an active listener. Not an impassive listener, but an active listener. Not face the customer directly. If you're standing, lean forward on the balls of your feet, which moves all of your energy, your psychological energy forward. If you're sitting, lean forward physically like you're leaning into the person and listen intently. What we have found is that people who are listened to intently, their blood pressure goes up, their heart rate goes up, their galvanic skin response goes up, but what is most important is their self-esteem goes up. A person who is very closely listened to by a professional like yourself likes themselves more. They feel more valuable and they feel more important. They feel respected. They feel that what they're saying is of value. And so when you hang on every word, you have what Les Giblin, a communications expert, calls, you have what is called white magic. White magic is the magic of just listening intently to another person. It's the most powerful of all sales techniques. Every year, the Purchasing Managers Association of America, for whom I've spoken, does a study, and these are people who work for Fortune 1000 companies and larger, and all they do is buy stuff. They have the purchasing agent's office downstairs. Everything the company needs worldwide is sent there, and they just meet salespeople all day long. Salespeople just line up like in a busy dentist's office. They just line up and come in and give their presentations all day long. And so at the end of every year, they ask these people, what do you like most about salespeople? What do you like least? Well, what do you think that they like most about salespeople? Is they ask really good questions and they listen closely to understand my true needs. This is what the sales managers, the most active purchasers in America, like the most about salespeople. What do you think they like the least? They just come in here and talk nonstop and try to sell me their stuff without taking any time to find out what it is I really need. And so that's what they like the most, and what they like the least is attentive listening. Now, number 2 is pause before replying, or B, I'm sorry, pause before replying. Pause before replying. Pause 3 to 5 seconds. Now, in pausing, you have 3 advantages. Very often, you've been in a conversation where a person says 1, 2, 3, the other person says 4, 5, 6, A, B, C, D, F, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Is the person listening if they respond immediately? But if you say something, or the customer says something, and you pause, and you reflect on it, and you think about it, before you respond, you're telling the customer 3 things. First of all, what you're saying is really important, so I have to think about it before I answer, which compliments the prospect, raises their self-esteem, and it builds your credibility. The second thing is you avoid the risk of interrupting the prospect if he's just reorganizing his thoughts. But third of all, and this is very important for the rest of your life, if you pause, the words of the prospect actually soak in and you understand what he or she has just said at a deeper level of mind. You actually understand them better because you have let the words soak in. Whereas if you respond immediately, the words don't get a chance to soak in. So when somebody says something, pause. We say at home, if your spouse says something to you, pause, and just in that few seconds of pausing, you'll actually hear what they said. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? It's very powerful. So pausing has all benefits and no detriments. Number C is question for clarification. Question for clarification. And here is the basic rule, is the person who asks questions has control. The person who asks questions has control. And the very best question you could ask in selling is this. It is, how do you mean? How do you mean? A friend of mine was selling our seminar in New York recently, and he was talking to a prospective customer, and the fellow said, well, what have you learned from Brian Tracy's programs that's worthwhile applying? He said, how do you mean? He said, well, I mean, why would somebody go to a Brian Tracy program? He said, how do you mean exactly? And he just said, how do you mean? And the police said, well, how do you mean? And he just said this several times. And he said, I'm not answering. He said, yes, I am. I am answering you. I learned the question, how do you mean? How do you mean is the most powerful questions of all, because the person who asks, how do you mean, first of all, the person being asked will expand on their previous answer. I can't afford it. Well, how do you mean? Well, we just exhausted all of our funds. Well, how do you mean exactly? Well, we won't have the funds until the next quarter. Aha. So if we could put the billing into the next quarter, then we could make it work. Well, yes, absolutely. I hadn't thought about that. Each time you ask, how do you mean, you get deeper and deeper into the answer. Also, when you ask the question, how do you mean, and listen intently, you get a chance to build trust, because the person who asks questions builds trust. So asking, how do you mean, it also enables you to take control of the sales conversation. D is feed it back, paraphrase it in your own words. This is called the acid test of listening. This is where you prove that you really were listening. This is where you prove that you weren't like one of those little dogs on the back of a car. You feed it back in your own words. So let me understand what you're saying. What you're concerned about is this, and what you want to accomplish is that, but what you had last time was this, and what you want next time is that. In other words, you feed back what they've said until they say, yes, that's it. That's my situation. When you do that, your credibility goes straight through the roof. It means that you were genuinely listening, you genuinely care, and you are genuinely trustworthy. So only then do you say, well, I think what we have is exactly the right thing for you, or I think we have something for you that will exactly be the right thing. But you only begin selling when you fed back what they have said accurately in your own words. And finally, number 8, we say that the key differentiator in selling, I mentioned this before, is the quality of the trust bond between you and the prospect. The quality of the trust bond is how high is the trust bond between you and the prospect. The rule is that if a customer really, really likes you, the details will not get in the way of buying from you. If the customer is not sure, if the credibility is at issue, the details will trip you up every step of the way. They'll argue over the details, and they'll argue over the price, and they'll argue over the differences between you and your competition. But if they like you, they'll find a reason to buy from you. So the trust bond is the critical factor. And the rule is that listening builds trust.